Hello and welcome to you all at Gisborough Christian Fellowship. Today we're looking at wisdom, in particular the gaining of wisdom. This is the start of our series in Proverbs, and we're going to be following the Pathway Bible Guide called The Art of Living. At the start I want to make it clear that what I've tried to do is explore what it actually says in Proverbs and also in commentaries on Proverbs. So trying to stick very much to the text of the book itself. So Proverbs was written by King Solomon, or attributed to King Solomon. Solomon, of course, was the biological son of King David and of Bathsheba. He was born in 990 BC, became king in 970 BC, and died 931 BC, so 1,000 years before Christ. He was very widely well regarded for his wisdom. All the earth sought Solomon's wisdom, it tells us. He was best known of his visitors was the Queen of Sheba. Now Sheba, or Seba apparently, as it was called, was a kingdom that was probably on both sides of the opening of the Red Sea at the south, between Yemen and the Horn of Africa. And interestingly, that Israel's Ethiopian Jewish community has been in the news this week. In particular, they are an immigrant population, a minority population, and they've had their first minister in the Israeli cabinet, ironically a minister for immigration, a lady. And in fact, there's quite an interesting story behind the Ethiopian Jews. They were evacuated from Sudan in 1984, end of 1984, under something that was called Operation Moses, which was organised by the Israeli Secret Service. But yes, Queen of Sheba was one of Solomon's visitors. And Solomon, of course, built the temple. Lots of fine materials coming from countries in the region, especially Lebanon. And that, no doubt, extended Solomon's influence. Trade is a very strong influence around a region, as indeed we know today. Solomon also had a disobedient side. He was wise, but also disobedient, stroke even foolish. He married very many pagan wives for political gain and for various alliances, notably with the Pharaoh, contrary to God's direct instructions. His sins also include idolatry and ultimately turning away from God. And then enemies rose up against Israel after Solomon's death, not during his lifetime, but it caused no problem. So he did have a foolish side. One of the most pivotal events was when God appeared to him in a dream, and God asked him, what shall I give you? And he asked for wisdom. In 1 Kings 3, I'm just going to read a little bit for you. And your servant is in the midst of your people who you've chosen, a great people, too many to be numbered or counted. Give your servant, therefore, an understanding mind to govern your people, that I may discern between good and evil. For who is able to govern this great people? It pleased the Lord that Solomon had asked for this. So let's look at the origin of the book of Proverbs. In 1 Kings 3, Solomon gets a mention that he's written 3,000 proverbs in his lifetime, and his songs numbered 1,005. That's a very specific number, isn't it? And actually, those were written in his lifetime. They're just 1,000 proverbs here in the book of Proverbs. Some apparently being passed down from David to Solomon. Some of them may been collected by others later on, notably the men of Hezekiah. But the nature of the book it's quite interesting. I mean, if you think about proverbs and sayings, the idea is that a few words put a principle in the front of your mind. As the dictionary says, short, pithy, commonly known expression which generally offers advice or wisdom. And the word proverb comes from the Hebrew to rule or to govern. So it's very much for active use. There are also riddles, where a question or statement is intentionally phrased to require ingenuity to understanding its meaning. So it's about engaging the mind. It's often written in couplets, in short sentences, which either contrast things or compare the similarities, or one second line complements the first. I thought it was quite interesting to note that Solomon's time was actually a peaceful time for Israel. Even his birth was significant in terms of peace between God. After the firstborn between David and with his affair with Bathsheba, his firstborn died. Remember, David engineered the death of Uriah so that he could take his wife. And that baby died. So Solomon was the second born, but it signified peace between God and David. And during Solomon's lifetime, there was a good, peaceful environment. And I think that's interesting because it allows a little bit more reflective learning, allows wisdom to flourish, rather than just learning to survive in the moment. People can reflect more, and governments and things can reflect more as well. Leaders can reflect more. The book's divided into 3 sections. Young people, 1 to 9, all people, and then for leaders at the end. And some of the book was written by others. There was a chap called Agur, and there's a King Lemuel, not somebody I'd heard of, I have to be honest. But Solomon's highly likely to have penned the chapters 1 to 29. Proverbs also is one of 5 wisdom books, as I discovered, including Psalms, Song of Solomon, Ecclesiastes, and Job. So it fits into that general category, and no doubt some of the other sayings of Solomon are included in those other books. And it deals with human struggles and real life experiences. I like the picture. The picture there is about the famous instance of 2 women competing for a little baby, where one baby has died and that mother has taken the other woman's baby. And Solomon is asked to make a judgment between them, and he says, divide the living child in 2, give half to the one and half to the other. And of course, the real mother then could only say, give it to the other woman because I don't want my baby to die. And that is one of the most famous parts, I think, of Solomon's life. So let's move on and just read the verses together. Proverbs 1 to 7. The Proverbs of Solomon, son of David, king of Israel, for gaining wisdom and instruction, for understanding words of insight, for receiving instruction in prudent behaviour, doing what is right and just and fair, for giving prudence to those who are simple, knowledge and discretion to the young. Let the wise listen and add to their learning, and let the discerning get guidance. For understanding proverbs and parables, the sayings and riddles of the wise. The fear of the Lord is the beginning of knowledge, but fools despise wisdom and instruction. And we're going to focus on these words just now. So that led me to think, well, what is Proverbs for? And I really finish up with 3 purposes, because life's quite complicated, isn't it? And I think that it's important to see how Proverbs can help. The first thing is, we need to know what is wise and how to act and how to speak. It's about implementing within everyday life, within day-to-day circumstances. And it's worth pointing out, this book is not about spiritual matters. This assumes that we already have a grip on those. This is about enacting those spiritual things. And we're being wise, basically, to be able to pass on wisdom, but only where it is welcome. Second purpose, to distinguish truth from falsehood. Now, we really desperately need that sort of insight today, don't we? I think in the last few years, the two have become, merging truth and falsehood has become an industry. It's become a skill, it's become a profession, more than just a bad habit. And yeah, we seem to have learned something very, very fundamentally here about mixing up truth with falsehood. Just the right amount that nobody knows which is which. And I think, speaking from my own experience, one makes mistakes in life. Sometimes it's wrong to just link things together, things that are unlinked. Or where I focus too much on one issue or the other. I think we all need the ability to distinguish truth from falsehood all the way through our lives. And we need to do what is right and just and fair. It got me thinking maybe those are three different things. What is right is not always just. What is just is not always fair. They don't always fit together. And we need to use common sense. I do laugh slightly when I hear the word common sense. When the government uses the word common sense, you really do wonder where we've got to. But even Jesus was eminently practical. Sabbath made for man, we covered in recent weeks. Life is more complicated than just sticking to the rules. Yes, we must stick to them, but often judgment is required. So for what use or for what outcome do we need wisdom? And several included in the passage we just read. To teach the young, to give the knowledge and discretion to the young. You've only got to see a young baby, as we've been blessed to in recent months, to see the thirst they have for learning. They're absolutely born with it. They are born to learn. And they need to know how to use the freedoms they've got and the decisions they need to make. They need to know how to use it wisely. They need to know how to use the knowledge of others. It's also to make wise men wiser. No one should think of themselves as being too wise to learn. As long as we live, we should strive to increase our useful learning. Nice little story. Pablo Casals, famous Spanish cellist, was asked by a young reporter, "Mr. Casals, you are 95 and the greatest cellist that ever lived." He was off to a good start, this young reporter. "The greatest cellist that ever lived. Why do you still practice 6 hours a day?" And Mr. Casals answered, age 95, "Because I think I'm making progress." And Matthew Henry, some 300 years ago, was quoting this saying, "If our stock of knowledge is not increasing, it is wasting." And that was quoted 300 years ago. Sounds like it comes out of a 21st century management book. It seems to me also the two things that Matthew Henry adds here. What use do we make of wisdom? Well, as a humble counsellor, to provide appropriate guidance, having understood the situation first. It's all very well to be rushing in with advice, but we need to know how it applies. And humble, I think we all would like our advice to be heard by those in power and acted upon and valued. But actually, it's often the poor that we need to help. The simple, as the proverb says. And if I can just clarify that for a minute, simple is a term which is used for people without morals or with inclination to sin. It's not intended to mean people that have mental difficulties. This is just the way that the proverb is written. Proverbs are written. The simple means people who are inclined to sin. Last point, as an interpreter, we need to help provide appropriate understanding with God's help and prayer, but providing appropriate understanding to other people. This takes a bit of work and care, developing understanding of wisdom. And we need to tell people why things are as they are. So let's move on. What is wisdom? And I'm trying here to reflect the terms used in Proverbs' first chapter. Let's consider some of those terms. Wisdom, well, it's the mind of God revealed. It's making use of the facts, right use of the facts. It's understanding God's created world, isn't it? Prudence. That's not overcaution, but planning and thinking ahead using what you know. You have to plan often because you don't have all the facts. You don't know everything that's going to happen. So you have to make some assumptions and you have to plan that those might not be right. So care in planning, prudence. Discretion. Things that struck me here was self-restraint and getting the timing right. It's not just speaking in a way that avoids causing offence, but it's about getting your intervention at the right time and maybe holding back a little, allowing some room for other people to show their own wisdom. Discipline. The Proverbs are for attaining discipline. And I think it's worth saying this needs to be the right sort of discipline. There are all kinds of things which require discipline, but there needs to be the right sort of things that we're pursuing. Discipline on its own is only a tool. And why would we gain wisdom? Why on earth would we want wisdom? Well, to use it. It's applying it that matters, but it really does need applying. This is about doing something or not doing something. And it should not be done randomly. It talks about acquiring a disciplined and prudent life. We need to use it all the time, repeatedly, but well. And so what about knowledge? Wisdom and knowledge are often put at sort of opposite ends, put next to each other and contrasted. And the acquisition of knowledge, understanding, is a good thing. No doubt about it. It's just not quite enough. Ecclesiastes says, of making many books there is no end, and much study wearies the body. Isn't that lovely? Much study wearies the body. Oh yes, say all the students. Absolutely. And as a nation, as people, we crave knowledge, don't we? Give you a few examples. We buy books. We keep them. We read them as well. We visit and revere libraries. We send our kids to university for 3 years, sometimes longer. As businesses, we encourage adult learning. As individuals, we do evening classes or study online, etc., etc., etc. We do crave knowledge, but we also must learn to live out what we know, based obviously on proper understanding of what we know. So what does wisdom give you? Well, it gives you restraint in words and actions. Proverbs 14 says, one who is wise is cautious and turns away from evil, but a fool is reckless and careless. It gives you the ability to learn, in particular, the ability to accept reproof, rebuke, accept people doubting you, accepting the danger of being wrong. Yeah? Learning is not dramatic in its performance. It's often quite low-key, but it's effective, it's dramatic in its output. And I like this picture. The dog is really going well into this learning business. It gives light, it gives clarity, ability to see clearly what others maybe cannot. Jesus spoke to them saying, I am the light of the world. Whoever follows me will not walk in darkness, but will have the light of life. That's in John 8. You're able to see one thing in the light of another, able to validate something, comparing with other examples. What does it give you? Something of great value. God delights in it, Jeremiah 9. But let him who boasts in this, that he understands, but let him who boasts, boast in this, that he understands and knows me, that I am the Lord, who practices steadfast love, justice, and righteousness in the earth. And what doesn't give you? Wisdom? It doesn't give you enough wisdom. None of us can say we don't want any more. The amount of wisdom is not related to the amount you have or don't have, the amount you need. And I need to recognise I have a lot to learn, as we do at every stage in your life. It doesn't give you anything to boast about either. The truly wise are humble. They're not pompous. Other people will discount your wisdom. Thus saith the Lord, let not the wise man boast in his wisdom. Let not the mighty man boast in his might. Let not the rich man boast in his riches. And the chapter 1 then continues, and one of the first points to make is do not be led away from wisdom. God has already made us wise. Do not ignore the wisdom you already have. We do not have to learn everything firsthand, ladies and gentlemen. We can use the knowledge and wisdom and guidance of other people to avoid things, especially things that are bad for us. Maybe overindulgence. Maybe dishonest gain. Maybe following the wrong crowd. It is easy to be led away from wisdom. One of the things that devices, if you like, that are used in Proverbs are the personification of ideas, making something into a person so it's easier to understand. And what Proverbs does in several different places, compare wisdom to a woman. Proverbs 4 says, do not forsake her, and she will keep you. Love her, and she will guide you. And I like this. I thought, wisdom as a woman, what's the picture that I've got in my mind? And this is where it says in the later part of chapter 1, wisdom calls aloud in the street. It's accessible to all. Jesus made the point that none of his teaching was given in secret. And God yearns for us to be wise. How long will you simple ones love your simple ways, it says in verse 22 in chapter 1. He pleads for a response to his rebuke. He stretched out his hand to us. He yearns for us to be wise. And yeah, the fruits of rejecting wisdom are sad. So how do we be wise? Well, just some very simple things to say here as we bring this to a conclusion. Love and be humble. Phrase from Selling. I quite like it, but it works in lots of different circumstances. No one cares how much you know until they know how much you care. How true is that in terms of wisdom? Nobody cares how much you know until they know how much you care. I think it's very important to listen carefully, like the dog does here. If you listen carefully enough, you will hear. People will tell you. People love to be heard. But it's difficult. And listening needs to be done actively. We need to take advice. Even seek inputs we do not want or think we do not want. A scoffer does not like to be reproved. He will not go to the wise. We must not be like the scoffer. And we need to consider what is wise constantly. A bit like driving, eh? This board really isn't very much help. We need to be constantly wise. When we speak, we need to associate with the wise. It's interesting that many of the opening and closing greetings of the New Testament letters refer to understanding and wisdom. We need to be checking with God through prayer. And Jesus is wisdom in action. Jesus is the mind of God in action. We need to follow teaching of Jesus. So, in conclusion, what is the application of this? This is about being like God, including being wise. That we should develop relationships like God's done, based on love and wisdom. There is no such thing as standing still as far as wisdom is concerned. We need to keep moving. We need to develop relationships like God. We should be wise in speech. Remember, others might actually hear and be listening and remember what we say. We should be wise. We should be diligent in all things. Solomon asks for wisdom, so can we. If any of you lacks wisdom, you should ask God, who gives generously to all without finding fault, and it will be given to you. Last thoughts. If we are wise, we're in good company. Wisdom is the future. Proverbs 24. If you find wisdom, there will be a future and your hope will not be cut off. Like Solomon, wisdom is a choice. We need to choose to be wise. Amen. And the last thing we need to put on the table here. Fear of the Lord is the beginning of knowledge, but fools despise wisdom and discipline. Fear of the Lord is the beginning of knowledge. That's what it says. And we need God's help here. We need to reverently ask for God's help. Wisdom is not based on a huge stock of some asset. It's not based on a huge stock of experience or success or influence or resources, money, etc. Or big stock of misfortunes or knowledge or inside information or gossip. It's based on a working relationship with God for the start, for the middle, for the end. And, worth bearing in mind, it doesn't necessarily stop you from sinning. Example, Solomon. And like the cellist, wisdom also requires some maintenance.